Good afternoon. This briefing outlines a federal immigration enforcement surge in Minnesota, known as Operation Reboot, a lawful, time-limited response to a breakdown in the system. It is centered on Minneapolis and the Twin Cities Metro, and it represents a decisive federal intervention to restore lawful governance where normal enforcement has been thwarted. Minnesota is facing an unprecedented breakdown in immigration enforcement and public order due to state and local non-cooperation. Sanctuary policies and open defiance by state authorities have created a hostile environment for federal officers and left dangerous individuals at large. Federal laws cannot presently be executed through ordinary means in Minnesota, a failure of governance that makes this extraordinary federal action necessary to uphold the rule of law and protect public safety. In response, the President should invoke both the Insurrection Act and the National Emergencies Act, an extraordinary but lawful intervention under our Constitution. Under the Insurrection Act, when unlawful obstructions make it impracticable to enforce the laws by normal means, the President can deploy federal forces. The primary federal force required to achieve this mission is the federalization of the Minnesota National Guard and the unorganized territory of Fort Snelling. This would provide a locally integrated workforce to assist with site operations, security, and during at-large actions, as well as a strategic operational workspace. Minnesota's deliberate non-cooperation and misinformation campaign has successfully increased obstruction and violence against federal agents as they conduct law enforcement activities and while off-duty in the public. This behavior is encouraged by the same public officials embroiled in a significant welfare fraud and electioneering scandal. Therefore, and simultaneously, a national emergency should be declared to address the administrative collapse in Minnesota's institutions, enabling the President to activate special authorities to stabilize the situation. The brazenness and scale of the fraud implies either systemic corruption by public officials or gross incompetence that has lost the confidence of the people. This combined federal action is narrowly focused and civilian-led. It is not martial law. Its aim is to restore lawful governance and public safety, not to punish or permanently take over state functions. Our Federal Emergency Action Plan is centered on establishing a unified command and a high-capacity administrative immigration processing center at the Minnesota State Fairgrounds. The goal is a proportional, temporary, and lawful intervention that can process immigration cases efficiently despite local resistance. By repurposing the fairgrounds and the adjacent university campus as a large-scale processing hub under federal jurisdiction, we create a controlled environment where due process is upheld on-site by immigration judges and officers. In essence, this is an emergency federal enforcement surge that treats the issue as a civil administrative operation rather than a punitive occupation. Under the emergency authorities invoked, the federal government assumes temporary jurisdiction over these facilities strictly to execute federal law where state cooperation has failed. This framework enables a unified civilian command, predictable security, and continuous administrative throughput, all without permanently seizing state property or altering its civilian character. Rather than relying on a single building, we deliberately combine the fairgrounds' crowd-handling infrastructure with the university's office and dormitory capacity to create a flexible, professional administrative ecosystem for high-volume processing. We are executing this plan through a phased implementation and escalation protocol, a bureaucratic deployment model, not a combat operation. By treating this mission as an administrative process-driven challenge, we emphasize service, verification, and due process at every step, reserving coercive enforcement as a clearly defined last resort. Each phase of the operation builds on the previous one, providing off-ramps for compliance and escalating consequences only for non-compliance. Early phases focus on outreach and voluntary compliance, later phases on judicial enforcement, creating a predictable gradient that encourages cooperation and strengthens the legitimacy of enforcement actions. The central principle is coordination through centralization. By collocating officers, judges, and support staff in one secure hub, we replace fragmented, high-risk field activity with orderly administrative throughput. This operation is a 5-phase plan, starting with a 30-day startup window. Phase 1 sets the stage for the facility and the legal process and is concurrent to the ongoing targeted field operations. It begins with a new issuance of an administrative subpoena for every non-citizen excluding legal permanent residents that is residing in Minnesota. The subpoenas provide clear notice, explain the process and timelines, and direct individuals to report to the Administrative Immigration Processing Center for an in-person review. Each notice requests only specific, relevant information, proof of immigration status, current address, household members, any public benefits received, and explicitly states that if someone is lawfully present, this check-in will confirm their status and they will not face immediate deportation. Coordinated outreach campaign, including mailed notices to the address of record flyers, digital announcements, and multilingual guidance, explains where to go, what to bring, and what to expect, so that everyone understands the process and their obligation to comply. The message is uniform and non-discriminatory. All non-citizens below legal permanent resident status in Minnesota must check in, and lawful presence will be confirmed through a professional, orderly process. Not responding to the administrative subpoena will lead to escalation, judicial subpoenas, and proceedings under the law, but Phase 1 is designed to avoid any need for escalation by making compliance simple, accessible, and clearly explained. The last 2 weeks of Phase 1 will be a soft launch as we begin with a legal status check-in for a limited, low-risk group of non-citizens, those who are legally present and work authorized, specifically the temporary worker visas and the student and exchange visas, to validate our infrastructure and procedures under real conditions without confrontation. Individuals are encouraged to pre-submit their subpoena information via an online portal for more efficient and prioritized experience. Operationally, it stress tests our systems under friendly conditions, shaking out any logistical or software issues before higher risk and higher volume of populations come in. Administratively, it corrects and updates federal databases with high-confidence in-person data, which can be cross-referenced with state records to support audits and resource allocation. Publicly, Phase 1 establishes legitimacy. The public sees federal officers calmly administering the law at a central location, not conducting indiscriminate raids. Media cameras will observe orderly intake, e.g. legally present workers checking in routinely, which sends a powerful narrative of institutional control, rule of law, and fairness. In Phase 2, the operation broadens to include higher risk or less stable status groups, and we introduce strong incentives for voluntary compliance. This phase targets individuals who are more likely to evade or spark controversy or require extra time to accurately review their case file due to complexity. For example, recent entrants who scheduled asylum appointments via the CBP One app, and those whose temporary protected status (TPS) has expired. Recognizing the greater risk of non-compliance in these populations, we roll out a robust incentive structure, essentially a set of rewards and assistance for those who self-report, to encourage people to come forward on their own rather than requiring enforcement to locate them. These participate early, incentives are concrete and valuable. For instance, individuals who comply with their notice and appear for processing within the deadline can receive a $500 cash compliance stipend upon completion. They are allowed to carry up to $1,000 in cash per person when departing, ensuring they are not forced to leave destitute. Each person can bring standard luggage, one carry-on, one checked bag, and for larger family groups of 5 or more, the government will ship 1 pallet of personal goods to their home country, subject to inspection. We also budget for a neighboring state ID bonus, a 250% boost on the stipend for a total of $1,250 for those willing to depart peacefully. The state fair site is large enough to implement a surrendered vehicle rebate on site, which can balance local prices upon disposition and provide another financial incentive to comply. All these incentives are designed to make the path of least resistance, showing up and departing voluntarily, also the most personally advantageous choice. We communicate these benefits clearly and repeatedly to the affected communities so that people understand they have much to gain by coming in early and much to lose by ignoring us. In effect, Phase 2 attempts to turn potential evaders into willing participants by removing reasons to hide and giving reasons to comply. At the same time, Phase 2 tightens legal pressure for anyone who ignores the initial administrative notices. If someone fails to respond to their administrative subpoena within the 30 days, the process escalates. An immigration judge will issue a judicial subpoena compelling their appearance with a 14-day deadline. This shift from a request by immigration officials to an order from a judge underscores the seriousness of the matter and makes clear that the window for voluntary compliance is closing. Failure to heed a judicial subpoena can result in contempt of court. In Phase 2, we transparently shorten the timeline and raise the stakes. We go from asking to demanding, all within lawful procedure. Individuals are put on notice that if they ignore the court as well, the next steps will be warrants and enforcement. Phase 3 is about pivoting from broad intake to targeted enforcement prep. It starts when we have collected enough addresses, employment details, and tips about illegal activities like employers hiring off the books or document fraud. By the end of this phase, we will have a clear list of priority targets, especially key employers and facilitators, and a cache of evidence ready for action. We will also give one final opportunity for any individuals who have not yet cooperated to come forward or provide evidence, essentially ensuring we've gathered everything we can before moving to enforcement. Phase 3 is short, intense, and behind the scenes, but it sets the stage for Phase 4 by making sure that when we do move to enforcement, it's precisely directed and justified by a strong evidentiary record. Phase 4 begins active judicial enforcement across the entire state. At this stage, anyone who has ignored both an administrative subpoena and a judicial subpoena is unequivocally non-compliant and now faces court-ordered consequences. Immigration judges, having given ample warning, will issue warrants for contempt of court for these individuals due to their failure to obey the judicial subpoenas, and will simultaneously enter final orders of removal, deportation in absentia, as permitted by law. These court orders give our officers clear authority to arrest and remove the remaining targets. Enforcement at this point is not a discretionary field action, but the execution of a judge's order under the law. In other words, non-compliance is no longer just an immigration violation. It is a violation of a direct court mandate, which fully justifies immediate enforcement action. Every step taken by Phase 4 is backed by a law and a judge's order, and this legal rigor is crucial for public legitimacy and for withstanding any judicial scrutiny or challenge. Immigration warrants are now backed by additional judicial authority and become a powerful administrative tool for legal detention and evidence collection. Phase 4 will conclude when Minnesota has been swept of the vast majority of identified undocumented individuals who were targeted in this operation. Through either voluntary departure in earlier phases or direct enforcement now, those who were subject to this program will largely have been processed and either confirmed lawful or removed. The network of employers enabling illegal labor will have been severely disrupted. Many will face legal action or be put out of business, removing that magnet for future illegal employment. Further, the sheer volume of evidence collected and verified throughout subpoena process or immigration search warrants will produce a flood of legally obtained criminal evidence to be prosecuted or handed to local authorities when trust is restored. This whole-of-government solution does not waste valuable criminal intelligence and allows for swift verification and processing. This is how the existing infrastructure of the State Fairgrounds and U of M St. Paul campus will operate together and efficiently. All critical functions, intake, processing, legal interviews, court hearings, custody, meals, medical care, and final staging for release or removal, are available either on the fairgrounds or adjacent campus. This program unlocks unparalleled capacity to surge operations efficiently while maintaining due process and operational order at scale. The Minnesota site can handle thousands of cases per day at one location, something that would be impossible without this co-location strategy. Phase 5 shifts the focus from immediate enforcement to the future and legacy of the operation. By now, the initial surge in Minnesota is largely complete. This phase is about harvesting lessons learned, maintaining the infrastructure and goodwill we've built, and positioning this initiative as a springboard for broader national immigration policy reforms. In essence, we solidify Minnesota's success as a lasting model for the country. Finally, as we look ahead in Phase 5, we also acknowledge what the Minnesota operation deliberately did not tackle initially and why. For example, throughout the earlier phases, we avoided particularly sensitive locations like schools or hospitals for enforcement, and we focused on adults rather than making a spectacle of detaining families with young U.S. citizen children. These choices were made to maintain a positive public image and reduce backlash in the early stages. The plan recognizes that going forward, a truly comprehensive enforcement regime might eventually have to address individuals in all locations once public support is stronger and legal reforms are in place. By candidly addressing these limits, we set the stage for future, more secure operations. This operation in Minnesota is a lawful, tightly controlled, and finite federal response to a grave breakdown in immigration governance. We framed it from the start as an administrative surge, not a military action, and we have maintained that character throughout. We have upheld due process at every turn, giving people notices, opportunities, and hearings, and we kept the focus on enabling compliance rather than punishing indiscriminately. We acted with urgency, but also with legal precision and transparency. The program's design ensured that enforcement was a consequence, not a starting posture, reinforcing both fairness and effectiveness. As promised, once order is restored and the emergency conditions are resolved, we are stepping back and returning authority to state and local institutions. This mission was always intended to conclude, and we are nearly at that point, with Minnesota stabilized and normal governance reestablished. The mission will have been accomplished, the rule of law restored, public safety secured, and a powerful example set for the nation on how to faithfully execute immigration laws at scale while preserving our values. Minnesota will emerge from this not in chaos, but with lawful governance restored and a template for others to follow. Thank you.